Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Dynamics GP year-end closing workshop. Couple of housekeeping notes before I turn this over to Sandy. We are offering CPE credit for this session. In order to be eligible, you must answer all of the poll questions that we will be displaying periodically through the webinar. We have an action-packed, content-rich session today. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Sandy Wickman.
Thanks, Dawn. Good morning, everyone. So nice to be with you again. And congratulations. You've come to another year end. Can you believe that 2024 is nearly complete? So today we're going to be spending some time talking about your year end closing processes within GP. And the thing that I'd like you to take away most importantly is if you can improve your month end close, your year end close will be easy. Right? The biggest issue we're going to discuss is the importance of balancing the general ledger and the subledgers. So there is a workbook that we'll be following along with. It's called Training Dynamo Year-End Closing Workbook. It was a separate purchase. However, if you did choose to purchase that, I will be calling out the page numbers so you can follow along in the workbook and make notes as you choose to. And 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 you'll also be getting the slide deck. So you'll have that to be able to refer to as well. There's a little picture there of the workbook. If you happen to purchase it, that would be what we're going to use. And our agenda today, we're going to talk about some pre-close tasks and checklists. Distribution series is the first place that we start. So we're going to do purchase order processing and sales order processing, then inventory, then your core modules, receivables, payables, and tax. And lastly, the finance modules, fixed asset and general ledger. It is important that you do these in the proper order. So please take a look at that, consider that. General ledger, fixed assets and general ledger should be last. We will not be covering payroll in this session. There is a separate payroll year end in GP webinar that will be presented by LBMC. And if you have questions about that or the timing, you can email Dawn and she can get you the details. So as I mentioned, there is a closing workflow, distribution series, then the core modules, additional modules, and lastly, the general ledger. The year-end close for the general ledger summarizes all of the activity for the profit and loss accounts for the fiscal year, and it creates an entry to the retained earnings account. And the year-end close process for general ledger also pushes the final balances of your balance sheet accounts into the beginning balance field for reports and inquiries. And it's part of the reason that general ledger is the last thing that we do. So what's the secret, right? The secret to a pain-free year-end close. Sorry about that. It's all about period end closing. So on page 7 in your workbook, like it speaks to all of the things that you can do on a monthly basis. Yes, assuming your fiscal periods are monthly. All the things that you can do on that period end basis that will then make your year end be just as smooth as it can be. We're actually going to be looking at some of the modules where a period end is the only activities. There's no additional steps for the year end. Okay. There is a pre-close checklist. We're on page 8 in your workbook. The nice thing about this workbook is it provides these sort of work pages throughout the workbook. You can make copies of them, you can create your own, but they give you checklists of things that you can be looking at to make sure that you accomplish all of those period end activities. So the first thing we're going to do is check the disk space on the server. We'll create some folders, set up the new fiscal year, review master posting and batch recovery. We'll post all the batches for the year end. Then we're going to get everybody out of GP and we're going to do backups. So It is important that you work with your IT team on timing. And the reason that that's the case is because at various points throughout this process, I'm going to mention that we're going to take another SQL backup. So these SQL backups are something that you would want to put into a folder. And then once all of your year end is done, you can decide whether you keep any or all of the backups that we make through this process. But you'll want to coordinate with your IT team so that they're available when you are to take these additional backups. So checking the server disk space. So you can do this months, weeks in advance of your close. The important thing is that you need to be sure that there's enough space available on your server to do the actual functions. Now, the functions take up some room temporarily, but you need to be sure that your server has the space for that. So why take the risk, right? If you're low on memory, the other thing you can do is get it fixed before you attempt your closing. So on page 9 in your workbook is a calculation to determine the available megabytes in your server. Now that calculation gives you an ability to be able to see that there is enough space available. Okay. Printing versus saving a copy. So if you ran all of the reports that get generated to paper and printed them out through this process, you'd be spending reams and reams of paper. There really isn't a reason to do that. These reports are huge. So it's better to print them to a file and to the screen. So the screen just lets you know that the report completed, and you can look at it if you choose. But the print to file is why we're going to create some folders, and we're going to put all of these year-end printed reports in file format into this folder. And then you'll have it available to you for reference as you need. Then we're going to set up a new fiscal year, and we're going to be going back and forth between actual GP and the slide deck. So this will be the first place where I'm going to leave the slide deck and go into GP and show you about setting up a new fiscal period. So I'm going to go back over here to my GP, and I'm here on my home page in GP. I'm going to navigate to the administration area page. In the setup box, under company, and choose fiscal periods. Now, some or all of what we're navigating to today may be secured in your user based on your GP user access. So you may also need to work with your IT team if you don't have access to something. So this fiscal period setup is where we're actually controlling what modules people have access to. It also is where we create new years. So in my case, I've got new years already created out to 2031. So for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to create year 2032. You'll be creating 2025. So when I typed in the next year, it cleared the screen and it asks me, is my first day 1/1/2032 and the last day 12/31/2032? If that's true, and I have 12 periods in my standard year, then I just click on the calculate button and it creates that new fiscal year for me. Now, typically, I'll want to close all of those periods because I don't want anybody posting into next year until I make that available to them. And lastly, the period names can be changed to be the words of your months if month is what your periods are. So if you want this to say January instead of period 1, you can type it here, and then when you see fiscal periods throughout your system, there'll be the actual name of the period instead of periods 1 through 12. Okay, back to our slide deck. So user activity. There is a way within GP to be able to see all of the users who have access, who are actively using your system, user activity. And the navigation to see that is listed on the slide. In addition, as of GP 2013 R2, you have the ability to be able to send users a message to tell them to log out of GP. So you can tell them to log out and send them a time, or you can send them a reminder if you'd like. That's also under admin utilities and send users a message. So that's a handy thing to do when you've got a user downtime. Okay, next step, batch recovery. So it's important to keep an eye on batch recovery all the time, but it's especially important as you approach your period end. So administration, routines, and batch recovery will show me any batches that didn't actually get through the process. Now, sometimes those batches have errors and they need to be edited. In other times, when you click on the batch and you continue, it will automatically go through and post that batch for you if any errors had already been completed. Sometimes that happens on occasion when there's interruptions in the posting or something. Master posting. Master posting is the place where I get to see all of the one-stop shop for unposted batches. Now, one of the recommendations is that you post all batches before you do year end. Now, the only caveat to that is in master posting, you can change the series. And if you set the series to sales and you still have open sales orders that are not complete yet, it's fine to leave those open. Like you would not want to have to clear all those open sales orders that you've got untaken for your sales for next year. But otherwise, all the other series should likely have all of the batches posted. Okay. So administration, routines, and master posting. Administration in the routines section, and there's master posting. This is also the same navigation to get to that batch recovery. So in master posting, again, if I change it to sales and I've got sales transactions that are saved in here for my batches, it's fine to leave those. You will see a message later on that I'll point out. But for things like this, for all these financial batches, all the purchasing batches, and all the inventory batches, as well as project if you use it, all of these batches should be posted, leaving only sales remaining. Okay, this is our first one. Backup is critical. So we're on page 17 in your workbook, right? This is a critical step. Don't rely on your nightly backups that were done last night, right? IT typically schedules a routine backup, typically takes place during off hours at night, but you don't want to rely only on that to be able to go back to if you needed to. These should be unique, special backups that you make immediately before you take action for your period end and year end activities. Okay. We're going to put those in that special folder that you created at the beginning of the session that holds your year end information. Okay, Dawn, I think we're ready for poll question number 1.
All right. You should see a pop-up window. And as it relates specifically to year-end closing, when should special SQL backups be created? First choice is prior to closing each month, prior to closing only the GL module, prior to closing only if fixed assets is included in your GP install, and the last option is none. Simply rely on your nightly backup. And I'll give this a few more seconds. Please, if you are looking to get a CPE certificate, this is the first poll question, and we do need you to answer all of them. All right, I'll be closing this down.
Thanks, Dawn.
You're welcome.
So if you chose to invest in the workbook that I've mentioned a few times now, we're on page 18, and there are some couple of funny stories from the GP trenches of things that have happened when these unique backups were not created. So if you want to take a look at those, we definitely as consultants have lots of stories about the times when there was no backup to go back to and they had tried to close something in year end. Okay, purchase order processing. That's our first module that we're going to be working with. So in purchase order processing, we're going to review and post all the batches, make sure everything's posted, delete any empty or unused batches. We're going to print that received, not invoiced report. We're going to balance that to our GL, and then there's an optional step to remove completed purchase orders. So generating the received, not invoiced report, um, there's two methods to do that. One of them is in a standard report in the purchasing module, which I'll show you. But as of GP 2015 R2, there also was an SSRS version of that report. That is SQL Server Reporting Services version of that historical report that gives you a point in time. So the one that's produced, this RNI report that's produced out of GP, is up to the point in time that you run it. The SSRS report actually lets you put a date in for a cutoff. So two options. I'm going to go back to GP. And we're going to look at the one that is for the standard GP. So I'm going to the purchasing area page. And in my reports, I'm going to pick analysis. And if I click the down arrow, then I can scroll down in the list and I see the received not invoiced report. Now I have one called demo that I've set up, and you can make your selections in here. For the most part, you want to not have any restrictions. There really shouldn't be any restrictions on RNI. You should be looking at everything. You could sort it in either PO number or vendor ID number, and then you change your destination to screen and file so that you can get those to the screen and to the 2024 year-end folder. Okay, that report should then balance to your accrued purchases GL account. So you're going to print out the report, you're going to balance it to the GL. Now, each of us may have a different number for our accrued purchases account. So I'm going to go to my financial area page and in my inquiry and pick summary. And you would look for whatever account you have that's for accrued purchases. In my environment, my test company, accrued purchases is this GL account. And then you'd look for the last year, right? So in your case, you're going to balance it to 2024 numbers, and you would balance it to this total. So that RNI report gets reconciled to your general ledger. The next thing that we want to do is also super important. It is um, to validate that we have indicated in our company that we want to maintain history. Super important, right? I mean, if you're not telling it that you want to maintain history, then you're doing transactions that are not going to be kept in your system. Okay. So I'm going to go back to GP. I'm navigating in my purchasing area page in the setup pane and picking purchase order processing. And right here in the middle of the screen, you see maintain history, and all four of those checkboxes should be marked. If you're not using requisitions, it's not a problem to have this box marked anyway. There just won't be any history. But it's a kind of a mind thing to just say all history all the time, keep all the history. So all four boxes should be marked. Okay. And then that optional step, we're on page 24. The optional step is to remove the completed purchase orders. Now, I'm not a fan of the word removing because it really doesn't remove them if you're keeping history, right? So as long as we mark those boxes, completed purchase orders won't be deleted. They'll just be moved to the historical parts of your database. Okay. So make sure you do a backup before you do this optional step to move these purchase orders to history. So in the purchasing area page, in routines, it's remove completed purchase orders. You can do this based on dates, by people, by PO numbers, right? So most of the time what we would do is say, I want to remove all the document dates for all the POs that are completed, only completed from and to specific dates. Then you also have the ability to be able to say, and insert that. Once the restrictions have been inserted, you also have this button down here to be able to manage the restrictions in more detail, right? And once you've completed that set, you click on the process button and it'll move the POs to history. Okay, there are no additional steps for completing the purchase module close beyond what we did for the period close. There's no additional steps for year end in purchase orders. Okay, there's no special routine or button or utility for year end. Once we did the 12th period close, we've completed what we need to for purchase order processing. And then we're going to move on to sales order processing. So we're on page 26. And our checklist is we're going to review and post again, delete any empty batches, post all the batches that we can. Again, keeping sales orders is fine. Verify the history settings again. And then we're going to reconcile and remove sales documents. So again, that ability to be able to maintain history, super important, right? So I'm going to show you how we'll navigate to that. So in GP, I'm going to go to the sales area page in the setup area. Okay, notice my setup is down at the bottom. Pick sales order processing. And in this case, the options, sorry, that's not true. Let's go back and look at our slide again. It's right there. Maintain history. All 4 boxes. Again, it doesn't matter if you don't use quotes. Just make sure you've got all 4 boxes marked to maintain the history in your system. Then we're going to make sure all of those batches are posted, delete any empty unused ones. We verified our history settings. Then the last step in sales order processing is to remove sales documents. So on page 27, it talks about typically sales transactions automatically move to history. When the sales order is done, it's become an invoice, it automatically moves them to history with the exception of, right? If there was some part of it that you canceled a line item or it was voided, you might have to transfer those to history manually, which is what this step on 27 does. So in the sales area page in utilities, it's reconcile remove sales documents. Now in this window, you have some choices. If you mark the print report only during the time that this radio button is on either one of these, it's going to just print the report and tell you what will happen when you do these. So if I mark this box and process, it's just going to tell me what it'll reconcile. Or I can do this one and it'll just tell me what it's going to move to history or remove. And then once I'm satisfied and I've reviewed the report, I can unmark that box and do the same set of steps and process it. And it will move what I now know based on the print the report only. Make sure that you have a backup before you do this step. Please have a special backup. Then if there's anything that happens in the process, it will not interrupt you. You can restore to the backup. Okay. This is slide that talks about the same thing as I just talked about on the GP application. Again, in sales order processing, the last period end is the last set of steps for you to do. There is not a special routine for year end in sales order processing. Okay, the next thing I want to do is talk about the timing for payables and receivables as far as year end close is concerned, right? The timing is very important for that. It's absolutely acceptable to do the year-end close for payables when you're ready. So, as an example, you may not get invoices from vendors until weeks or months after the actual 1/1/2025 day. So you don't always want to think about closing payables immediately. However, it's fine to do that. There just are a few windows in Smart List where the numbers won't necessarily be accurate for the year-to-date numbers. Okay, so on page 28 and 29, it talks about some of the fields that may not be accurate. The one thing that's important to this is you want to have your 1099s completed. Make sure you've got your year-to-date numbers in your 1099s, and then be able to do your payables close, right? So in Smart List and Inquiry windows, in some cases there are year-to-date numbers and other considerations, but it's absolutely fine to do the year-end close when you're ready. Dawn, did it look like we had a question come in? Is there something I need to answer?
No, I don't believe so. I was just in the chat. That's
Okay,
probably the alert that you saw.
okay, very good. Thank you.
Mhm.
So we're going to start with receivables management, the period end checklist. So we're going to post all AR transactions, review the unapplied documents and take care of applying things. We're going to age our customer balances. We'll print the reports and compare them to the general ledger. And then lastly, we'll close that fiscal period. So that checklist is on page 30 and 31. So you can make copies of that and use those things routinely. I do want to mention that in GP, there are some things called checklists, which can be useful if you wanted to use those. The thing that is a challenge about those checklists is if someone opens the function to do the task on the checklist, just opening them puts the user ID and the time in it as though they were completed. They don't actually have to complete the task, just opening them marks the checklist as done. So many customers have not chosen to use those checklists. So we're going to start with reviewing our unapplied documents, right? So in sales reports, there is an unapplied documents, but there also is a smart list. So I'm going to first show you on the sales area page in reports, under analysis is an unapplied documents report. Again, I've got one called demo, and you get some choices, right? You can sort it by specific things. You could limit it if you wanted to do that. Probably not the best practice. Probably best is to leave it wide open and then make sure your destination is screen and file and put the contents in that 2024 year-end close file location. That report will give you a list of all the things that are unapplied, and you can determine then whether it makes sense to leave them unapplied or to apply those to things in your open transactions. The other thing that you have under Smart Lists, Microsoft sends lists of Smart Lists that are useful to all customers. So I'm clicking on the Sales Plus and the receivable transactions, And there is out of the box an unapplied documents in the smart list that you can choose to use to be able to do those apply transactions as well. If you find that there are documents here or payments here that you do want to apply, then you can navigate to the sales transaction area and you'll pick the apply sales documents. In this window, you'll look up your customers that you want to apply transactions, look up the open transactions that need to be applied, where you can apply those transactions here in this window. And there's more information on that on page 35. I do want to make note for you that if you have already moved transactions into history and you now recognize that there's a challenge with the way that they were applied, there is a tool within the Professional Services Tools Library, the PSTL, that will allow you to unapply already applied receivables so that you can make adjustments to the way that they're applied to things. If you need to or would like to have access to that, it is an installed tool set. And if you'd give us a call, please, we'd be happy to install it with you so that you'll have access to do that activity of the receivables unapply. So then the next step on our checklist was to run the AR aging function. So I want to note that accounts receivable balances do not automatically age in GP, right? This allows you to keep your balances in the same buckets as your collections letters and statements. So if you use the collections management modules, which is now a for sale functionality, the aging doesn't necessarily happen, which keeps those two things in sync, which of course you would want to have that in sync because you're doing collection from it. So running the function that ages your AR is important. Even though it looks like whenever you run your aging, it looks like it's already been done, it's important to run this on your period end basis. So I'm in my sales area page again, in routines, and I'm picking aging. Now, there are a couple of choices for a report down here in this. I suggest that you pick no report. There really isn't a reason to run this report. The other reports that you run from the historical age trial balances are a different format, so this report isn't terribly useful. Move it to that, change your aging date, click on the process button. All of those aging buckets will get aligned based on the way that you requested it age. Okay. Then, if you're taking advantage of the write-off of over and under payments, you can use that write-off documents function in the routines area to do the write-offs. Now, there is some setup on those write-offs that you have to do in order to be able to allow that to work, but you can certainly do the setup, and we're happy to help you with that as well. Be sure you have another good backup before you do write-offs. You may need to go backwards if you didn't get everything set up completely. And those are on 37 and 38 in your workbook. So we did the AR aging, right? That slide. And we are at the write-off of over and under payments within the slide deck. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is verifying the history settings for accounts receivable. Now, these settings are not held, sorry, these settings are not held at the module level. These are actually held on each individual customer's record. So we can set that starting at the customer class, and then it rolls down to individual customers. So I'm going to show you in our GP environment on the sales area page, cards section. I'm going to pick customer and I'll look for our Aaron Fitz customer. And on the options button, I see my maintain history. All check boxes are completed, right? So I'm keeping history for all of those things. Now, that originally came from the class ID. So when I drill back to my class ID, I can see that all of my classes were set up to maintain history as well. But important for you to be able to see that all of those customers had that setting, there is a smart list that you can use, create, to be able to do that. So in the back of your workbook, there is an appendix section. And in that appendix section, let's see, is it number one? Uh, in the appendix section on page 79 in your workbook, it shows how you can create a smart list to show the customer and vendor history settings. So you don't have to open every single customer window to know that you've got those settings correct. Okay. Right. So using Smart List to verify the customer history settings, you can use the customers list, add those columns, and you would be able to see yes or no whether all of those have been clicked or not. Okay. Then we're going to move paid transactions to history. So on page 40 in your workbook, GP does not automatically move AR transactions to history when they're fully paid or applied. So you want to do this on a periodic basis so that your inquiries are good, but it also helps optimize your system's performance, right? Important thing, right? We want it to run well. So this is going to help us to do that. So in sales routines is paid transaction removal. Now remember, we look to make sure that all the history is being kept first because removal doesn't really mean it's removing it completely as long as we're keeping history. It simply moves it to history. Now within this window, there are a couple of boxes where in the remove section, where they've given us an additional box here for a cutoff date. So in terms of non-sufficient funds, we might want to keep things open a little longer to make sure that any checks we received don't come back with non-sufficient funds. So typically what we'll do is, although we're doing this for year end, I might put 11/30/24 as my cutoff so that I've got an additional 30 days in case I get an NSF. Same is true for this box. I might want to keep those in my open transaction just a bit longer to make sure that those checks from customers all get cleared. The other ones, it's going to go ahead and move voids, waived, and paid transactions and move those to history. I do have the ability to do a customer range or a class range. Typically, we leave that all blank as selected, included all, and just change these two dates. Click the process button. It will print a register. So when the box comes up, be sure you print it to the screen and to the file location that you have your 2024 links in. Then you're going to print your AR agings. So in the sales reports, typically pick history. Sorry, typically pick trial balance and then history, right? Historical age trial balance. And you get to set up the criteria for your age trial balance. So print age as of dates, which things you want to exclude. Typically, it's printing in the functional currency. And down here at the bottom, you would typically not have any restrictions. And be sure your report goes to the screen and to the file you located. Okay, on page 43, there is an additional step to complete the um, fiscal period. Sorry, lost my thought there for a moment. So in receivable management, you want to go to the, in your administration area page, go to the company setup and pick fiscal periods. And you come into that 2024 year and make sure that you mark to close all of the sales for all of the periods for sales. We don't want anyone to be able to book anything more into receivables or sales at this time. We've completed our tasks and we don't want anyone to do anything more, right? Now, the receivables management does have a year-end close function. So we're on page 44 and we will do this. It's you can mark this box in the fiscal periods either before or after that year-end function. So in the routines area page for sales is the year-end close. Now, you can choose to do year-end close for either fiscal or calendar or both. So if your fiscal and calendar are the same year, you can do close all. If you have a different fiscal year than calendar year, you may do this process multiple times throughout the year so that you close fiscal when your fiscal year ends. You want to be sure that the print report is here. And note, take note that the last closing date, that will be the actual date when you took action, not the last time that you closed a year. So it probably won't be 12/31 of 23. It'll be the date that you actually went through these steps. So what does receivables year-end close do? The year-end close process summarizes the activity since your last year-to-date close in the last year fields. So last year-to-date fields, it summarizes. And the year-end close process clears the activity in your year-to-date values. So all of your customer year-to-date numbers are all going to get cleared so it can start for the next year. Okay. So there's our list. We have a special SQL backup, do the year-end close, run the report to our folders, as well as the navigation to get there. Now the year-end close report could be really big. Make sure you only print it to the screen and to a file. Don't try and print it out to paper. And I think we're ready for poll question number 2.
All right. We've got poll question number 2 up. And just a reminder in the chat, I've got a message that following the workshop, and give me a couple of days to do this, I'll send an email with a copy of the slides and a link to the recording. And then also, our sister company processes the CPE certificates on our behalf, and they ask that you allow 2 weeks to receive your CPE certificate. So the first email will be coming from me. The second email will be coming, it won't be coming from me, but be on the lookout in the next couple of weeks for that. So we've got our second poll question up. Please note that if you are here for CPE credit, you must answer all poll questions.
Thank you, Dawn.
Great. And I'm going to end the poll in just a couple of beats here. Great. And turn it back to Sandy.
Very good. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is the tax year-end close. Now, tax year-end close, as you must know, taxes in GP affect all the modules. So it affects payables, receivables, purchase orders, sales orders, wherever you have it turned on. So the tax year-end close only has to happen once. You don't have separate closes for tax for all the different modules that tax impacts. So this is only done once under administration routines and tax year-end close. All right. Page 46, we're on payables management. So we're going to post all those batches, check our batch recovery window, period end reports like historical age trial balance. We're going to reconcile that to the general ledger and then close that fiscal period. There are some checklists. Again, you can choose to use them if you like. So printing AP aging reports, I want to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about 1099s. So I'm going to go back over to my GP, and on the purchasing area page, in trial balances, and we're going to pick the historical age trial balance again. So this set of criteria or options that you save should be the one that you use on a regular basis on every period end to reconcile this report to your general ledger. In this case, you'll also want to print a copy to that file that we're keeping the files for year end, right? You'll want to have that available in case there's some reason that you have to go back to that report at that point in time. Okay, 1099s. So every year something changes about 1099s every year. The thing that changed at the year end 2023 was there were um, numbers of customers who now have to file 1099s electronically. So there's only very few customers that have a small enough record limit that you don't have to do electronic filing. So this slide talks about forms and envelopes. That really only applies to a very small segment of customers because they usually have more records and have to do the electronic filing. So keep that in mind. Also, make sure your AP team knows when you plan to do the 1099s and the year end because they need to make sure everything gets posted, everything's available within the 1099 values that you're going to run. Okay. We'll talk a little bit more about printing 1099s. Verifying the vendor history settings. So again, this is very much like it was on the customers, where every vendor has a maintain history settings. So you'll want to use that smart list to be able to validate the history settings. So you're not looking at every single one of them. And then the year-end checklist. So we've completed the 12th period end checklist. We're going to do a Dynamics and company database backup, print your 1099s, and then close the year. So printing your 1099s and 1096 forms are done through the payables routines. Okay, so this speaks to that change in the filing where you must e-file if the sum of all returns is 10 or more. So that's not just for, one type of 1099, that's all of them. So very few customers will be less than that 10 minimum. So adding support for 1099 NEC happened in the 2020 version of GP. So it is collecting information. If you've set up your GP properly, it's collecting the information for the non-employee compensation values and that different form. It also has, as of that same version, DBA and new tax types, right? So if your company is doing business as something else, the DBA value is added and it can be added to the tax type information that's printed. This speaks to where the DBA reference is in your vendor, as well as how it will print on your 1099 forms. It is possible to update the values and or even the reporting values for 1099. So if you've got unusual or different circumstances, GP can still be there for you and track your 1099 information. We just may need to change some of the details. So LBMC has this slide speaks to the fact that LBMC has tested exporting the lined information from your GP environment to be able to do the electronic filing with. there is no electronic filing directly in the GP code. However, LBMC has some things that we can do to export the information out to help you be able to import that to the electronic submission. Now, there's steps to do, so please don't wait until, late February to get in touch with us. But if you contact us at techhelp@lbmc.com, we will be able to help you get the data out to do your electronic forms submission. Okay, once we're done with 1099s, we're going to do the year-end close function. Okay. So in purchasing routines is the year-end close. Again, you get to choose whether you're closing fiscal and calendar or both. You want to be sure that the print report box has a check mark. And unlike the other one that we just did for receivables, there's no process button on the ribbon. It's a close year button at the bottom. Sorry about that. Microsoft didn't standardize that, but you know the secret. When you close the year, be sure that the report gets printed to the screen and printed to your file saving. There is a payables management year-end close report. It's very large. I did add this slide to tell you what happens when you do the payables close so that you can see those values and those details. And this one actually speaks to the inquiries and smart list fields that are updated after the year is closed. All right, I'll check in quickly. Dawn, do we have any questions?
We do not.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, our next module that we're going to close then is the inventory control. So we have a checklist. We're on page 56 in your workbook. So we're going to review and post all the stock counts and adjustments that we need to do. If you did a physical count of your inventory, we're going to check that batch recovery window. We're going to print the stock status or HITB report. And I want to make note here that the only report that Microsoft suggests that you use to reconcile inventory to your general ledger is the HITB, Historical Inventory Trial Balance. The stock status reports were never designed to balance to your general ledger. Okay. So if you're not using the HITB, get in touch with us. We'd be happy to help you with that. You're going to verify the item history settings, reconcile that to the GL, and then close the fiscal periods. And then there's a year-end checklist. So we're doing all of those 12th month period end things. We're going to do a reconcile, right? An inventory reconcile. And then any annual physical count, we're going to do a dynamics and a company database backup. And only then do we do the inventory year-end close function. Okay, so in our inventory control, I want to show you where the HITB report would live. So I'm going to my inventory area page. In my reports, under activity, and if you have activated the historical inventory trial balance, it would be the last report in the activities reports. If you don't see it here, it's because it has not been activated, and there's a set of steps that are necessary to be able to activate that. So please do get in touch with us, techhelp@lbmc.com. I have a demo version here. I would print that to my destination of screen and file, and then validate that HITB report balances to my general ledger. Okay. You can also set that HITB report to give you a variety of additional segments of reports. So if you want to have a segment that's for individual sites or other reasons, those are all available to you. Okay, inventory year end then. Got our period end done. We're going to close the year. So in the inventory routines, is our year-end close. We're on page 59, and it mentions there, and I repeat, leave all boxes unchecked. Leave all those boxes unchecked. There is a different place, if you're using standard cost, there's a different place where you would update standard costs. I'm starting at the bottom. And as you scroll up, the remove of discontinued items or sold lot attributes or sold receipts, you don't want to do that as a part of your year-end process. If there's a reason to do that, there's other ways to do it. So do not mark any of these boxes, then click on the process button. Okay. So inventory close, what happened? Okay, notice that there is no report that prints when you close inventory. All summarized current year information is moved to history, quantities, costs, and sales information. The beginning quantity of each item is updated to be the on-hand quantity at each site, and the quantity sold field for each item is reset to 0. Okay, fixed assets is our next module. So for all of those who are using fixed assets, it's very important that you make sure that you do those 12th period end close activities before you do the year end, right? Make sure that you've processed everything from the fixed asset module into the general ledger, right? Additions, changes, transfers, process all of that through to the general ledger, and then print your activity reports and your inventory reports, fixed asset inventory reports. Only then do you do the year-end processing function. And we're on page 62 in the workbook. Okay, so fixed asset depreciation, right? That's a period end function. You should be doing this every month. The one difference is if you have additional books, so on this slide, you'll see that I have an internal book, which is probably the one that I would be doing monthly activity, period activity with. But I have also in my environment an AMT and a federal book. Now, it's very possible that you only depreciate those books once a year. So don't forget to do that, right? If it's the end of your fiscal calendar year, you'll want to also depreciate your other books that rely on different tax um, settings for your fixed assets, like the federal and AMT books. Post that through to the general ledger, right? There is a separate step that posts the fixed asset information from the fixed asset module into the general ledger. Be sure you've done that for all transactions and activities. You can see and validate the journal entry that gets created. Make sure you post that, right? The status at the bottom of this window should show that that's been posted. And then there's fixed asset year-end close. So we'll go back to GP. And on my financial area page, in routines, under fixed assets, is year end. Now, in this window, you get to pick which books you're going to do the year end for. So again, you will have already run the depreciation for these books at the end of the year. So you would, I actually prefer to do them one at a time. It's absolutely possible to insert all of them if you choose to. I like to do one at a time just because I get, a little satisfaction in knowing that I did each step individually and everything worked the way I wanted it to. If you did all three and something went wrong, you wouldn't know which book it happened in. Okay. Take a little extra time, insert it. You'd click on the continue button in this case, right? Continue button. There is a year-end close report that prints, right? Be sure that you print it to the screen and save it, a copy of it in your files so that you've got that. We're on page 67, which shows you a little example of what the report looks like when you actually do that. Be sure you get through all of those different books if you have multiples. And there's also an example of what the year-end close report looks like. Then you need to print all of the other reports that you like to keep, like an inventory report, so forth, for that fixed asset module. Okay. We're on page 68. We're in the general ledger closing now. So we've completed the closing for all of the other modules apart from the general ledger. So we get all those other ones done first and then do the GL. So we're going to do our period end processes. We're going to review and post all of our manual journal entries. We're going to post any recurring entries, review and post our GL batches, check that batch recovery window once more, make sure there's nothing in it. We'll print the trial balances. We'll print our financial statements and then close that fiscal period. Then we'll look at the year-end checklist, right? So we've completed all the period end things in this prior slide. We'll verify all our account types. And again, we're going to look at that in the appendix. Review the general ledger setup, print the trial balance, make our backups, verify the fiscal year settings, and then close the general ledger. So big red letters at the bottom of this slide, do not double click the close button. Move your mouse away, and I'll speak to that again in just a few minutes. Okay, so the first important thing that we're doing is verifying our account types. So by default, when you open this account maintenance window, the posting type goes to balance sheet. Well, because it's already got something in the radio box or radio button, sometimes we forget to move it to P&L accounts, right? It's important that you have that. It's critical that you have that setting for the posting types accurate. So in Appendix 6 in the workbook, there is a way to verify the settings in the smart list, right? If you did the close and you had one of these set incorrectly, there are some things that we can help you with to be able to go backwards to fix things. But in the posting type, it's determining whether the balance sheet accounts are rolling up to beginning balances or the P&L accounts are closing to retained earnings. So a significant difference just based on that radio button. So we're going to review the general ledger setup window and look for the posting to maintain history, as well as this box to allow posting to history is important to you because it will allow you to post a transaction into the most recently closed historical year. So as an example, let's say it's March and you just now got your closing entries from your CPA firm. Well, we did closing a long time ago. As long as that box, posting to history, allow posting to history, is marked, we can open the fiscal period and go do a transaction to that last 12/31 fiscal period to put our accountant closing entries into last year. It'll allow us to do that. And when you book that transaction, it will actually book all the sides of it. So if it went to retained earnings or had an impact on retained earnings, it'll book all of that activity for you. Okay. So financial setup, general ledger. So in my financial area page, in setup, I'm going to general ledger. Okay. You need to be sure you have a retained earnings account. If you happen to close to multiple accounts for retained earnings, you can check this box and determine which segment that is. You also have the ability to use this blue expansion button to see the name of the account, right? So you can be sure that it says retained earnings. And this is the maintained history section. Be sure all of those are marked. Again, if you don't do budget transactions, doesn't hurt anything, go ahead and mark the box. And then the allow posting to history. Mark that box. That'll give us the ability to be able to do that transaction after year end when we get the closing entries from our CPA. Okay, so we're gonna keep all of that in our smart list. Under financial, under accounts, you have the ability to be able to add the columns for the posting type. Where you'll be able to see balance sheet and P&L accounts. Review this list carefully. Make sure that your posting types are set appropriately before you do the year-end function. Okay. All right. Do another backup. This is a really important time for you to have a good backup. The general ledger year-end close, right? If we had to go back because one of the posting types was set wrong or something else, we want to be sure you have a good set of backups. Back up the company, back up the Dynamics database. If you use Management Reporter, you might also back up the MR database, right? So be sure that you have good backups. Don't rely on just your nightly backup to be able to do this from. Okay, Dawn, poll question number 3.
Okay, poll question number 3 is up, Sandy. Under what circumstances could you post a general ledger or a general journal to the most recent closed year after year end is complete? And Sandy, I'm checking no questions either in the chat or the Q&A right now. All right, I'm going to be closing down the poll in just a few seconds. So please make your selection. And I'm going to end the poll and turn it back over to Sandy.
Great, thanks, Dawn.
Yeah.
Okay, we are on page 72 in your workbook. The general ledger year-end close. So I mentioned early on that if you have sales orders and you leave them in batches for your to be able to produce or deliver against next year, there will be a message that comes up, GL close warning message. It tells you that there are single-use batches of quick journals that have not posted yet. So make sure that all of the batches, except for those sales orders, are already all posted. Otherwise, you can click cancel and go backwards at this point, go back and post those batches before you go on to the next step. In the general ledger year-end closing window, there actually is a progress bar, a status bar, and some words that print out on there. So we're going to go look at navigating to this window. Please be patient. Do not click close year more than once, right? Be sure that you're careful with this window. So we're going to go to our routines, financial area page in the routines section. Routines section and year-end closing. So it shows us the retained earnings account that came from the setup window that we just looked at. It tells you what the next starting journal entry number is going to be. There's no reason for you to change that. It's just moving forward one journal entry at a time. So allow it to take the next default journal entry. These checkboxes to remove unused segment numbers, there's a manual way to do that it's not so invisible. I don't suggest that you check that box. The next one though, maintain inactive accounts, I definitely suggest that you mark that box, maintain inactive accounts, and all inactive accounts. Now, you can always go remove inactive accounts in a different way if you want to, but I like to maintain my inactive accounts until I'm ready to do something different with them. And then at the bottom of the window, you click the Close Year button. On the slides, you'll see the green bar, that's the status bar, and also here where it says step 3 of 7 complete. You're waiting until it says in this box that the close is complete. There is a report that prints out. Oh, some warnings, be patient. GL closing process can take several hours. So again, you've got all your GP users out. Do this after hours. Make sure you have good backups and then be patient. Don't push the button and leave for the night, right? You want to be able to make sure that you see this through to the end. There is a report. Again, you'll want to print it to the screen and to the file. Once it comes to the screen, in this case, very often you'll want to print it to a printer, which you can do right from the report. We want to be able to keep this one. This is one that's going to show you what closed to retained earnings. So you'll see there on the slide, we've got a year-end closing report. It shows you the journal entry number and the date. It also shows you the amount that got closed into retained earnings, excuse me, into retained earnings and which accounts closed to retained earnings. So you're going to check this over and make sure that you've got all the details accurate. And your year-end close, the confirmation shows by this process complete here. Okay, some notes for you. Unlike AP and AR, General Ledger does not need to be closed before posting to the new year, right? So we talked about timing for AP and AR, but you can leave General Ledger open as long as you choose to. Now, there will be some places where you'll have to do some other things to be able to see current periods for 2025, but you do not have to close General Ledger until you're ready to. However, on the other hand, if you get, accountant entries later in the year, we already know that we can post that to the most recent closed year. So there really isn't a reason to leave General Ledger open for a long time, right? You can still close, you can use reports and inquiries, right? And just one more reminder, make sure that all of those account types are set up correctly, or you can give us a call if you find you haven't done that. And poll question number 4.
So poll question number 4 is, I am interested in hearing more about help from LBMC Tech in upgrading my version of GP. Working with LBMC, they would conduct a business process review and show you how to get the most out of your GP system and any gap areas that might need attention. Inform me of future webinars conducted by LBMC Tech, or just not sure at this time. So I'll give this a few more minutes. Not minutes, a few more seconds. And I'm going to end the poll and turn things back over to Sandy.
Thank you, Dawn. So the last couple of things that I wanted to do is point out some things that are in the appendix. So even if you didn't get the workbook, you get the value of these appendix that are in the workbook, right? So available on Microsoft Dynamics 2013 R2, you have the ability to be able to send a message to the users, right? It pops right up on their GP screen, and this is the way that you set up that message. You can also do the notification with a reminder. So if you want to send it out ahead of time and remind people that they have to log out in 2 hours or something, you can do that. The Appendix 2 is a smart list for unposted transactions. So you can see all of those unposted transactions in a module by module search. So you'd be able to then go in and make sure that those things get posted. Smart list to verify the history settings, right? So you can do that based on the customers or vendors. You can do that for either one. So in Appendix 4, there's a thing called an account roll-up inquiry. So if you have multiple inventory accounts and you want to balance the whole total of all of the inventory GL accounts to your trial balance HITB, historical inventory trial balance, you can create a roll-up inquiry and then be able to use something that looks very similar to the financial summary window to be able to balance your accounts to it. It's really super handy. So if you haven't used the account roll-up inquiry, it's a very useful tool. Appendix 5, Smart List to verify the 1099 vendor setup. Again, really nice to be able to have it in a Smart List format so you can be able to look at that, look for DBAs, make sure that you've got all your 1099 account numbers all set in there and so forth. You can do that in a Smart List. Appendix 6, to verify GL account setups. We looked at that in practice in our webinar, but this also appendix gives you some information about what you would see. Appendix 7, reconciling to the general ledger. So there is functionality to be able to reconcile to the general ledger using an Excel spreadsheet. In the financial routines area, you can use the reconcile to GL. Now I want to go back into GP for a second and point out to you the reconcile to GL actually has multiple choices for the module to reconcile. So payables and receivables, this can be a very handy tool. Inventory and bank rec, I don't necessarily suggest that you use this reconcile to GL. You can use the inventory one to just kind of get a baseline, but you should use that historical inventory trial balance. And the bank reconciliation, you can use this to get lists of transactions, but you still need to do the bank reconciliation function in order to mark those records as reconciled. Okay, poll question number 5.
This is our last poll question. What tool set is an efficient source for verifying GL account types prior to closing general ledger? Please make your selection, and I will be closing down the poll in just a couple of seconds. Great, Sandy, it's all yours.
Thank you, Dawn. I do want to make note too that there is, if you're still struggling with being able to reconcile your accounts to your general ledger, there is a tool called the Closer. It is a for purchase tool that's available. It's an ISV. If you'd like for us to give you some more information about it, we'd be happy to do that. Reporting Central is the ISV name, and the Closer is the name of the tool. If you'd like to email us at techhelp at lbmc.com. We'd be happy to get you some information about that. And Dawn, that really wraps things up unless we have anyone that has any questions. Is there any questions?
Nope, no questions. Nothing in the chat beyond what I've put in there. So, everyone, thank you very much for joining us. Everyone at LBMC Tech wishes you a smooth year-end closing and happy holidays. And thank you to Sandy for giving us such a rich presentation. I'm sure that there was a lot of learning, and it will make this year-end closing a lot simpler than perhaps in years past. So, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.